to the second session of motivating students to learn chemistry. So in the last session, if you can still recall, we started off with some of the motivation theory, and we spent quite a bit of time on self-determination theory, and then we kind of zoom in into autonomy. Then towards the end, we talk about the neuroscience aspect of our motivation. So today we're going to dive deeper into the neuroscience of motivation, specifically in the area of emotion as well as the memory. So without further ado, this will be today's agenda. And towards the end, we're going to have a sharing by HOD of Science from Anderson Serangoon JC. Okay, so as usual, periodically you'll be given time to take little brain break to write a simple note to self for either personal relevance or memory. That's what we call later on recall practice. Next activity. Okay, I want you to read the sentence on the slide to yourself and then count how many F's are there. Okay, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to count and type in the chat. Okay, when I say you all type but don't press enter first, then when I say enter, then you all enter at one go. Okay, yeah. Okay, 5 seconds. Okay, you all make sure you're key into the chat ready. And once you're ready, I want you all to hit enter at the same time. Okay. Okay, we have a various answer. We have 3, we have 6, we have 7, we have 5. So somebody must be right and somebody must be wrong. Okay, I'm going to review the answer and then you'll count again. Okay, so altogether there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, they're altogether 6 F's. Very often we miss out the F's in the off. Go, because it sounds more like OV rather than OF. Yeah, so I'm just using this exercise as a quick recap to why is it so difficult to even sometimes get the attention of our students, because attention is not something that is voluntary, it's largely involuntary. Yeah, so I hope this will jog your memory about our last session where we talk about attention and the reticular activating system, where we talk about our brain is flooded with all the data that's coming through the 5 senses. So I hope that will kind of help you to recap what we learned in the last session. So if you can recall, in the last session, we talked about attention and quite a fair bit about motivation. Now I'm going to go on to this part about the emotion of learning. And I will not spend too much time on it, but it is an important component, and I have illustrated to you the importance of it and how we can actually do it, even by a simple exercise like what we've done earlier on, sharing of the emotion, by labeling the emotion before the start of the lesson. So if you look at the learning, information enter through the senses, the 5 senses, it gets filtered, via the attention filter, and we all record, what is novel and what is dangerous or what will threaten us will get passed through and then get into our attention. And what is not novel and what is not dangerous usually get filtered out. And after the information get filtered through, it will reach the next part of the brain called the amygdala, or in short, we call it AME. This is also known as an emotional switching station. And when information get passed through this, then it will go into what we call the learning of the part of the brain, which is the memory. Okay, so this is where the amygdala is. It's a very, very small part of the brain, but it is a very important part of the brain. So basically, as the information comes through the RAS, the next part of the brain it will go through is the amygdala. So what happens is when the amygdala is swelling up, okay, the information unfortunately doesn't get to the prefrontal cortex, which is the place where we want the information to land up. It will get deflected downward. So what happens is when it gets deflected downward, the information doesn't get learned. And therefore, we ask ourselves, what will cause the amygdala to swell up? And there's only one word, stress. Stress will cause the amygdala to swell up. Now, of course, you may be wondering, Then how does a classroom associated with stress look like? When I first learned about this, the immediate thought I came to my mind was, okay, a stressful classroom probably be like a classroom that, I can't do most of the work, or I'm always persistently not able to accomplish the success criteria. That is true. However, boredom itself is actually a form of stress. When it is too easy, there's no need for mastery, there's low personal relevance, this boredom actually is associated with stress. And of course, the frustration from repeated failure to achieve a goal, it is also another form of stress. So stress is really in the form of either boredom or frustration. So when that happened, like what I shared earlier on, the access of information to the prefrontal cortex, which is really the secretary of the brain, will actually not take place. The lower brain will take control. That's why your student either zone out, or they will freeze when you ask them questions, or they will fight you by acting up. And that is something that, hey, we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, is my classroom stressful? And therefore resulting in a brain that has been stressed. So really the brain has this wonderful surviving programming. It is only 2.5 kg, but it uses 20% of all our resources. That's why some of you, sometime after going through maybe a 2-hour reading or 2-hour course, you feel so tired because you're actually consuming quite a fair bit of energy. And therefore, the way the brain program is to preserve its limited resources. Okay, and the brain also has a pleasure reward system, okay, to get it to resist its programming or to sustain its effort. So one of the neurotransmitter that we are interested in is called dopamine. Dopamine, of course, in its excessive release is bad, which is what social media is doing to our brain. Okay, however, dopamine in its right amount actually has a motivating factor. So basically, the dopamine is released to the prefrontal cortex, okay, from this part of the brain, okay? Not to worry about the name of it. Just remember, dopamine is something that will motivate our student. But how can we release that dopamine? Okay, so this part I've gone through. So dopamine is also the source of intrinsic motivation. And when dopamine increases, these are the factors that will also increase accordingly. Pleasure will increase, attention of our student will increase, they'll be motivated, they will persevere, and it actually promote the learning in the long-term memory. So dopamine is not all bad. Okay, it has its place, in our students' learning and in your learning as well. So what are the dopamine booster? I'll just quickly run through. Music is one possible dopamine booster. Of course, being humorous at the right time helps. Relatedness by interacting with their peers is a dopamine booster. That's why when students feel out of place in the classroom, they actually are not so motivated in learning. But I want to highlight the two that are in red. Making prediction, okay, as well as achieving challenges, okay, in the form of gamification or actually getting them to achieve certain level of competency are what we call dopamine booster. And in fact, achieving challenges is a high-power dopamine releaser. I give you an example. Gaming. I'm not too sure how many of you play games when you were younger or even now. Why is gaming such addictive? Because they are constantly challenging the player or the gamer to go for the next level. And the good thing about all this gaming, okay, they are designed to give you immediate feedback. And based on the feedback that you receive, you are actually now able to adjust maybe your strategy, the way how you play the game to achieve the next level of competency. And that itself is a very high power dopamine releaser. Similarly, for our students, if we can actually design our lesson to allow them to achieve competence in the learning that you have set up for them, okay, through feedback, through giving them targeted and timely feedback, they are actually big dopamine booster. So let us rethink about the whole idea of gamification. Of course, we do not just want to gamify for the sake of gamifying. We've got to gamify in a way to allow them to achieve competence, and that will be a real dopamine booster. So I kind of share on that, video game is very, very addictive. It's a sustained effort by a gamer, even though 80% of the time they are not, moving forward. But because the challenge is achievable, they get immediate feedback, and the incremental progress get them to keep staying on the game. But why is getting students to do prediction so compelling for them? Okay, why prediction? I think I was in one of the room just now. The teacher actually make the students to predict, some of the observation that they are likely to see, based on some practical video. Okay, so I want you to do a quick prediction now. Would you rather have 1 cent double every day for the next 30 days, or would you like to have 500,000 given to you right now? Okay, so don't take too long. Just make a prediction. Don't pick out your calculator and start to, punch in the data. Okay, so I want you all to indicate your choice. Is it A or is it B? Okay, so we have 6 of you to try, and maybe the other 3 will say, okay, I can't make up my mind. Maybe I want a 500,000, then I can maybe buy T-bill. Okay, okay, just kidding. Yeah, so indicate your choice, and if your choice is option B, what will be your estimate? Okay, so for those who have chosen choice B, now can I invite you to type in the chat, what is your estimate? The fact that you have chosen B, it must be more than 500,000, but what do you think is the estimated amount that you will get? Okay, so for the 6 of you who have chosen option B, I would like you all to just share very quickly the amount that you estimated it to be. You can type in the chat function. Okay, it has to be more than 500K. That's for sure, right? Option B is 500. Oh, I'm so sorry. Should be option A. Okay, that's my fault. I got the question wrong. Okay, for the particular participant who has chosen option A, what is your estimate? This is my bet. So I think there's only one participant who have chosen option A. Or the participant has decided to go to option B. Okay. Anyhow, let's carry on. I'm going to review the answer soon. But meanwhile, just remember that dopamine impact on all these things. Okay. So let me give you a few other thoughts. Give me a while. Okay. So basically, if you have chosen option A, you will have received 10 times more than the 500K, which is about $5 million. Okay. So this just to satisfy the curiosity for those who wonder why option A is actually a better option. Okay, let me stop share. Maybe I just want to know who chose option A just now. Okay, Wan Xing, why do you choose option A? Just curious.
Because I'm also a math teacher, if you double up, definitely will be more.
Okay, so
I also got key calculator after that to check. So actually I was keying when you were asking. I also want to know the amount.
Okay, so very exciting, right? Yeah, so imagine we get our students to do prediction. Of course, not all the times got to do with math. Sometimes we get them to predict about color change, so on and so forth. Yeah, and when we show them the results, whether is it right or wrong, actually it did a certain level of dopamine release. Yeah, so I hope to encourage you to consider that. But bearing that in mind, remember that alone may not arrive at learning. That's why we're going to talk about learning later on. Okay, so let me circle back to the slide. Okay, so for those who are math teacher, you may want to use this to teach geometry progression. Okay. Okay, so let's recap our asynchronous learning session. How does encouraging learner engagement via engage, explore, apply, motivate our students to learn chemistry? So I'm not too sure whether you all have actually explored this particular teaching action for your students. So this is one particular experiment that I've done, or rather this is one of the videos that I've seen before when I was trying to teach the topic of entropy. Okay, so among us, the JC teachers will be very familiar with. So I'm not too sure if you watched the video, but let's watch it together for a recap.
Dissolving ammonium chloride in...
Okay, I'm not going to play the music or play the sound, but basically get the students to observe. So in this case, the demonstration is to show I'm adding ammonium chloride to a beaker of water, but this beaker of water is placed on a wooden plank that has some water between the beaker and the wooden plank. Yeah. We can use a video like this, or you can use another image, okay, that maybe is unusual for your student. So the whole idea is we engage them. It could be through a discrepant event or through any event that can get their attention. But we should not stop there. We should get them to explore the observation, ask them to come up with a possible scientific reason, either individual as a group. They can, kind of like tap onto their prior knowledge if they have. In this case, because they have learned energetics for the JC students, so I get them to figure out what happened actually at dissolution. Technically, it should not stick because for any dissolving to happen, okay, based on what they have learned, it's supposed to be exothermic. So if it's exothermic, then I don't expect the water between the beaker and the wooden plank to freeze, but it actually frozen. And then I get them to research online. Then, of course, I get them to apply the new knowledge, in this case, with a particular chemistry question with the use of the data here. And then I challenge, their initial assumption, are all dissolution process endothermic? Yeah, so this is a way that you can actually apply, engage, explore, apply. The beauty about this teaching action, in my opinion, is the engagement part, because it really, drew their attention. That, hey, why is this happening in this way? Yeah, why is this discrepant event happening? And what is actually happening? We challenge a lot of assumption. So I do want to encourage you, you can make some modification, choose a good image or choose a good demonstration. You can have to think about it before you explore, with whatever chemistry theory that you want them to explore. Okay, so this is just a very quick summary. Why encouraging learner engagement through this particular teaching action actually motivate them to learn. I will not go into details because the slides are given to you. You can read it on your own. I want to spend more time on the learning part. So just take a minute. If today I, have to conduct home-based learning, do you think your home-based learning activities are stressful? If it is, what makes it stressful? In school, I think we more or less know the reason. Okay, so maybe you want to pen a note to yourself, what caused your classroom, specifically the home-based learning environment, stressful? And then maybe you can talk about how can I consider the use of gamification prediction in my chemistry lesson. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute for you all to think through and to pen a note to yourself. Few years back when we were doing some form of learning, in fact, reading in a room, we were trying to play some soft music at the background. One particular teacher actually shared with me after the workshop that, hey, I would appreciate if you turn off the music because I can't concentrate. So for some teachers, actually, for some learner, the playing of music can be actually an impediment to their learning. So I think it's important that we find out from our students. Yeah. So with that, we talk about attention. We have talked about emotion. Earlier part, I've talked about motivation. For the rest of today, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the memory. And this is the part that I would really strongly encourage you all to really consider some of the strategies that may help you, because we can get the information passed through the motivation filter. We can actually ensure that the classroom is not stressful, there is no boredom, the students are not facing frustration. But if the strategies that follow after that are not helping them to keep the learning in the long-term memory, then we will come back to square one. Okay, so this part, although it's the final part, to me, it is also important. It does not mean the earlier part of the neuroscience is not important. Every part of the neuroscience in the learning is important, but this is the part that we will spend a bit more time today. So I've gone through the sensors, the attention filter, we talk about the amygdala. Now we talk about short-term memory, or in today's context, most people prefer to use the word working memory. Okay, the memory that is at play, okay, when you're actually thinking about it, looking at the data. And of course, long-term memory or highest thinking skill, which we call executive functioning. Okay, so this is basically how the neurons look like. It look a bit, they are trying to use legs to describe. So basically, we have 86 billion neurons in our brain. Okay, and this is how the neuron actually looks like, the neuron parts, where the dendritic spine, where the dendrites, and the axon. Okay, and of course, what happened is the neuron will link when there's learning. So basically, this is how the neuron are actually connecting to each other when you're learning. So today, as you're listening to me, okay, you're actually forming what we call networking in your brain between the neurons. Not strong for most of you, because this is the first time you're encountering this set of information, okay? But as you take time to recap and learn it, it will get solidified. So basically, if I were to write and draw neurons in terms of dots, this is how it looks like. Okay, and the neurons network, they are being revisited through some of the practices later. It will get strengthened, as you can see in the bolder line. So this is a screen capture I took from the book. So basically, if you look at the diagram on the left, at the learning phase, when they start to learn and when they're starting to make connection, you can see there is a faint network that is connecting, not very strong. It gets darker. And as you begin to solidify the learning through regular practice, or what we call regular recall, you will begin to see that the network become to stronger and solidifying. And when you expose them to novel and challenging contexts, the learning gets strengthened and extended. That is why you don't unlearn something. You basically substitute, whatever network that you have formed in order to replace maybe a habit. Okay, so for the learning of our students, you must realize that actually they are trying to form network. And whatever we are doing, be it giving them homework or even giving them some routine in the classroom, we are hoping to link up the network as strongly as possible. Later, I'll be sharing some of the practices that you may want to consider that will help the linking process, because learning happens all the time. But if it's not linked up, it will break up over time. So this is a cognitive model of learning. You realize the word emotion is missing from this diagram because we're just looking from the cognitive point of view. So attention is what I've spoken about earlier on. And at the memory, basically, there are three stages that happen. First is encoding. Okay, the student or the learner need to encode whatever information that's passed through the senses. Then there is a storage. By storage, I mean the learning is passed from the working memory to the long-term memory. But there's no point in storing the information there. I must be able to retrieve. So while I can have a tremendous amount of storage space in my long-term memory, but if my retrieval strength is slow, like what most of our students experience, I learn, but I can't recall, then they will not be able to apply in either application phase or in the case where we are trying to get them to link between whatever they learn today and maybe another topic. So what is encoding? So in short, encoding is when learning is being attached to the prior knowledge. Okay, you encode it with the information that I already know. That is why activating prior knowledge is so important. Encoding doesn't take place in vacuum. Okay, once the information comes into the long-term memory, it will start to look for links with prior knowledge, either to write new experiences or attach a new experience to the prior knowledge. So this is what happened. It happened when the brain process information, okay, from the senses as well as the emotion that they feel. That's why emotion is such an important and a powerful tool when used rightly, because it will actually help the encoding. And this is where prior knowledge is also important, because the new information cannot just be attached to nothing. It has to be attached to something that is in the long-term memory called the prior knowledge. So the stronger we can activate the prior knowledge, the richer the sensory emotion experience, the better the information can be encoded into the long-term memory. So there's a few things that we need to take note of. First, we want to ensure that the learning is sensory rich, but of course, we do not want to overwhelm them. We need to know where to draw that balance. We need to kind of like able to emotionally, motivate them to want to learn. And then most importantly, if not the most important among the three ideas here, is to activate their prior knowledge. I'll talk more about the activating of prior knowledge later on. So what happened is from encoding, from attention to encoding, it basically means we attend to what we feel. Not feel, sorry, to what we feel. Okay? So feeling is such an important thing that we do not want to be labeled. But at the same time, we have to be watchful, and able to access, my students' emotional information. And when we are able to see our students able, to learn in a emotionally, safe and encouraging way, the learning will attach to the prior knowledge. So this is something that I want to bring your attention to. So information without anchor will just pass through us. So the anchor that I'm talking about here is senses, emotion, as well as prior knowledge. So these are three things that information need to be anchored in order for it to attach to a long-term memory. So remember, memory is not just placement of something in the mind, okay? It is establishment of neural connection. Like what I shared with you earlier on, the network must be formed in order for the learning to be transferred from the working memory to the long-term memory. So quite a fair bit of information here, but I just want to help you to bear in mind that the three things that help to anchor: number one, the senses; number two, the emotion; and the third, the prior knowledge. And the prior knowledge are already there in the long-term memory. And association will strengthen memory, which is actually prior knowledge. Okay, so this is just a graphical way to show you a working memory vis-a-vis a long-term memory. So the working memory is very limited. As you can see, the octopus holding on to just a few chunks of information. Once you move the information out of the student's eyes or sight or audio, actually the memory will just fall off unless it is being passed to the long-term memory. Okay, so this is typically a summary of a working memory. It can hold 4 to 5 items at any point of time. And if it's not transferred to long-term memory, it will only last for 18 to 30 seconds. And 1 in 10 students actually have challenges, okay, in their working memory. And remember, learning involves not just all the wonderful fireworks in our excitement, but it involves transfer from working memory to long-term memory. So if there's one thing we need to communicate to our students is learning is tough, but it is not impossible. And learning will involve hard work. Okay, so I want to give you a couple of moments to read through this scenario. Okay, I'll give you about 2 minutes to read through this scenario. not too sure whether any of your students make some of this comment to you before. I suffer from exam anxiety. I cannot do chemistry. And some of you even talk about their mother. My mother says I'm just like her, bad at chemistry. Yeah. So this student is not a bad student. You know, she has no learning disorder, no reading disorder. She does her homework. But why is it that she can't do chemistry? Maybe at mid-year exam or even maybe at some of your tests. May I suggest to you that student X problem is a case of inability or maybe a lacking to retrieve from her long-term memory. Because we have tremendous amount of storage. So the problem with some of our students could be not how much they can store, but how much they can retrieve. Yeah. So student X probably assume that she has learned by placing her learning in the working memory. Because many of our students just flip through the notes. Yeah. So it could be a case of there's no strong links formed in the long-term memory, and what we call the illusion of competency. And very often, we as adults also felt that, you know, we look at something, we thought that we cannot learn it until we are being tested or until we are being, you know, put in a situation we need to apply. Then we realize, hey, I don't quite actually recall the learning. In fact, today, if I ask you to do a quick recall, whatever that I just shared with you, some of you probably may struggle quite a fair bit, okay? Because there is no link or strong links formed in the long-term memory. Now, we can ask ourselves this big question. Then how can I form these links? But before I go to that, let's look at some of the working memory misconception. I'm not too sure whether you have intentionally or unintentionally labeled your students. Their problem could be a working memory problem, but they may exhibit some of this behavior. They're lazy, they're not trying, they lack motivation, or some of you may experience behavioral issue among your students, or they don't pay attention in the classroom. And very often, if you were to maybe take a moment now to think about the student that falls into one of these four categories. Maybe the student that you are struggling to teach is facing what we call a working memory issue. Not so much about behavioral issue, although some of what we call the learning disorder like ADHD is linked to working memory. But maybe this student really want to try very hard, but after a while, he realized, hey, I'm not learning and therefore I might as well give up. And maybe the problem is working memory. So as a result of this poor working memory, it actually resulted in the students forgetting, reluctant to contribute. Whenever you're talking about next topic, the student will say, oh, I'm already so many topics behind, so what's the point of me trying? And very often it leads to frustration and confusion. So working memory is limited. Okay, but what makes it worse is when we try to overload it. Okay, already we know it's limited at this point of time, but maybe we don't know, or maybe we think, hey, actually, maybe they can do it. But actually, one of the problems, maybe in our teaching and learning, including me, is we overload our students cognitively. I'm not too sure whether you have an experience where you feel that, wow, cognitively you're overloaded. Maybe right now some of you are feeling that way already. You're cognitively overloaded by what I'm sharing. Okay. And Sweller, okay, one of the education psychologists, actually came out of this cognitive load theory, which is something I'm going to share with you all today. And I hope that will provide the framework for you to relook at your lesson. Okay. In fact, Dylan Williams made this comment through a Twitter tweet, I think a few years back. He actually tweeted one morning that the single most important thing for a teacher to know, among many other things, is the cognitive load theory by Sweller. So most people have an almost physical sensation when they experience what we call a working memory overload. They describe as, well, you know, like the gear grinding, or the mental collapse, or some of you say, I just brain dead, okay, or brain tap, okay, for some of our students. And for you, maybe learning something for the first time. But how come teachers don't face it? Okay, and we all know why. Because we already have many of the things that we are teaching our students in our long-term memory. So for us, not so much of an issue because we can tap into our long-term memory. But for our students, they have not transferred the learning to the long-term memory. And before even the learning has been transferred, we overload their working memory. And therefore, it's not leading to any learning. So what makes up cognitive load? So cognitive load is made up of three loads. First, intrinsic load, extraneous load, and germane load. Okay, and you can read for yourself, really, what is intrinsic load? Basically, it's how complicated the topic or task is. It is dealing with the information that needs to be processed. For example, the number of elements that must be simultaneously processed in the working memory and their interaction with each other. So for example, when you're teaching maybe atomic structure, okay, for the first time, there are many novel things that your students need to realize, the subatomic particle and where they are positioned, and they are trying to imagine how they look like, in space. So tremendous amount of intrinsic load. Next will be extraneous load. Basically, this is the load that we impose on the student that does not support learning. So for example, maybe prior to you teaching atomic structure, you show a very, very exciting video clip about the solar system because you're trying to draw an analogy between the solar system and the atomic structure. But because the extraneous load from the solar system was so captivating, it actually took up quite a fair bit of the extraneous load. And therefore, unknowingly, in your good intention to use stories and images, you actually overload them. So some of you may be wondering, Ken Hui, on one hand, you tell me to use stories and images. On the other hand, you tell me it may actually overload my student. And therefore, it is important for us to know when to use it in a way skillfully so that we get their attention, but yet we do not overload them. And that call for us to make that professional judgment. And then finally, germane load. It is the measure of the extra load imposed by the teaching activity to support learning. Sometimes the use of manipulatives, bringing them to the lab, even to illustrate some of the things you are teaching, maybe in sort preparation, is necessary. And we call this the germane load. It is extra load, it is important, but it takes up the cognitive load. So in short, if today, as you look at your lesson, these are the three things that I want you to pay attention. You want to simplify your intrinsic cognitive load. So whatever complex new information you are providing for them, you hope to simplify in your presentation. You reduce your extraneous cognitive load. They're important sometimes to get their attention, but it should not be overwhelming. And finally, the germane load that allow them to deep process new information by connecting with their prior knowledge, we should maximize it. Sorry.
can read some messages in the chat. I want to see the chat.
Sure.
I think we're unable to hear.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh dear. I've been playing for the last, okay, allow me to,
Sorry, I was also cut out, drop out of the.
can. Sorry, allow me to replay again. Okay, basically this is a detailed explanation of the cognitive load theory, okay? So allow me to play the video clip again. I apologize.
Sorry, Kevin, I think need to reshare with the bottom left to share sound.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. So sorry.
Extraneous and germane.
Can you hear now?
These add up in order, meaning if the demands of the first two
Yes,
are
yeah.
there's less room for germane load before cognitive overload occurs. The first type is intrinsic load. This refers to the innate difficulty of a task for a particular learner. This is determined by the number of novel elements and the level of interactivity between the elements. Given working memory is limited to somewhere between 3 and 7 novel elements interacting at one time, but long-term memory is unlimited, the more elements a learner holds in long-term memory schemas, the easier the learning task will be, because working memory is only limited when dealing with novel information. So a task will have a base level or intrinsic load affected by the complexity of the task, the expertise, and the working memory capacity of the learner. The second type is extraneous load. This is the additional load imposed by poorly designed instructional materials. Any unnecessary details included in instructional material, like funny cat memes or background music or unnecessary anecdotes or flashy but useless animations, causes some of the students' cognitive capacity to be spent dealing with that. If you use poor fonts, speak in a monotone, or use complicated vocabulary, this also imposes extraneous load. It's anything included that does not directly contribute to the learning goal. The third type is germane load, or generative load. This is the mental capacity that is directed towards integrating the new information with existing knowledge. This is what we aim to encourage. One way to think of it is that this is the part of your mind going, oh, I get it, that's like, and linking to some past knowledge when you learn something. If we overload the brain, we leave no room for these valuable thoughts to occur. We can also directly encourage such thoughts in our design by including prompts like, remember when we studied a similar idea last week? So the aim of instructional design of any type is to manage how complicated a learning task is for our students, intrinsic load, reduce distracting material, extraneous load, and encourage germane load. Watch the next super short video to discover how learning is actually measured in cognitive load experiments.
Okay, so for those who are keen, this is one of the resources that I'm using. Sweller's cognitive load in action. It gives you some pretty good idea of some of the things that we may not realize that we are unknowingly doing that could actually overload our students cognitively. Okay, apologies, for the earlier no sound on the video clip. Okay, so essential questions that we have to really ask ourselves is, how can I anticipate working memory problem? How can I identify a working memory problem when it occurs? And how can I solve working memory problem? Really, in this part of the workshop, I really want you all to take on what we call a working memory perspective. As we look at our students, perhaps lack of motivation in the way that they are, behaving in the learning of chemistry. So basically, we can ask ourselves, is there too much information, new information or unrelated information for our students? We should talk about that. And is there any habits in the classroom which resulted in what we call a working memory problem? The time of the day, and we know certain time of day, our students tend to have a bit more challenges, in their learning. So we identify the working memory overload. Is it when they're trying to remember or holding while processing? Sometimes we give instruction and at the same time we ask them to look at what we are doing. And that could itself could unknowingly be a working memory overload. And a good example is doing what we call demonstration in a classroom, where we are trying to get them to see what we are doing with a paper and a burette. At the same time, we're trying to get them to look through exactly what is on their practical worksheet. And that itself unknowingly could be a working memory overload. Atypical distractibility or zoning out, where our students just get distracted, or they zone out when their memory is overloaded. And then of course, when they have gone through what we call a working memory overload, one of the things that we can see obviously in their mind is that they blank out. So we call it cognitive collapse. Okay, and therefore, it's important that you and we adopt a working memory perspectives, in the way we guide our students in learning. Hopefully, we convert our working memory demand to long-term memory by connecting to prior knowledge. We will talk about that a little later. Basically, this is something that is shared with me quite recently, So when I was looking at this set of information, it kind of like dawned upon me. These are same, but a bit different. So basically, these are actually shades of cognitive load theory. So this question was posed to me: are the split attention effect, redundancy effect, and coherency effects the same? Okay, and of course, we all know it is not the same. They are the same in a sense that they are branching off from cognitive load theory, but the way how it is being exhibited in our lesson may not be the same. So let me go through what exactly is split attention. So basically, if you look at the diagram here, the one that is on the left-hand side is a conventional diagram. And this particular diagram, although it is well labeled with all the different parts of the heart, it is actually cognitively more overloading than the integrated diagram that is on the right-hand side, because these constantly demand the student to switch, their attention on the diagram as well as the information below. So we call this split attention effect. So when the students are required to attend or refer to multiple sources of information simultaneously, they are integral to learning, we call this split attention effect. Or it could be a case of the way you organize your notes. Sometimes the diagram is on this page and the other information is on the other page. And then constantly when the students have to kind of flip the pages, we call this split attention effect. So one way to overcome this, is the way how we organize our notes, such that if preferably the information can be on a singular page or side by side, then that will be the best. The other form of cognitive load will be what we call coherency effect. So I've given you here a quick overview. So sometimes having additional material like diagrams, pictures can be helpful, but it can also create a form of cognitive overload. And when it is overly distracting, like animation in terms of PowerPoint or music, that is a bit too excessive, it actually can distract our students from learning what you intend them to learn. So this is what we call coherency effect. And then the redundancy effect, I think, as you can see from the term itself, is very clear. When the same information is repeated in two different formats, which I think from time to time we do make that mistake, including me myself, that when we often repeat what we say and what we want to present, in the PowerPoint slides at the same time, it actually can clog up unknowingly our students' working memory. So split attention versus redundancy versus coherency effect, is presented in this information. I hope this is helpful. In any of the three cases, it burdens the working memory. So let's take some time, even in the coming weeks, as we look at the way we present our notes or our slides. Are we actually unknowingly overloading our students cognitively? So this part, I think I've gone through. This is the one that I want to share with you. The other cognitive load that our students may be experiencing is the task is taking too long. Like for example, they have 10 steps to follow before they can even reach the steps that you want them to do. Then one of the way is we break it down with shorter deadlines or shorter maybe milestone for them to kind of like check. Sometimes the task is too difficult. Like for example, in a particular question, there's no scaffolding. So one way is we can break it down into small chunks with either scaffold questions or with scaffold diagrams to allow them to actually break down the task from a huge one to something that is manageable. When there are too many choices for our students, they can also get paralyzed, which we all experience. The other way is to highlight a clearer path to them that this is the way maybe you want to consider your learning. And I think SLS allow us to do that very, very effectively with the use of subgrouping. And of course, if too much information is presented at once, we may want to prioritize certain information first. So instead of giving them all 8 informations at one go, maybe we just show them 3, and the rest of them we just kind of like, cover it, and then we show them on at a later stage when it's necessary. Then towards the end, of course, we can show everything, but it may not be very wise to show them all in the information at one time at the start. So I want to just share with you very quickly, these are various ways that we may unknowingly actually overload our students cognitively. Okay, so these are the few slides that I thought I just want to kind of touch on as an additional kind of like material for you all to kind of review your teaching material. So let us emphasize to our students that learning is really not a walk in the park. I always thought that this is quite a nice, way, really Jurassic Park, full of challenges, so is learning. Okay, students tend to read the work solutions. They tend to solve near identical problems over and over again. And they love to underline big chunks of information. As a student, I do that. I highlight my entire page of notes to the point where I'm not even sure which are the information that are important. So if we are seeing our students doing that, we may want to rethink again. Is this really helping them? That is why I think many of you think, hey, maybe one of the way that they can learn is to use recall practice, which I think Aslin did talk about. Maybe that will stimulate their learning. And I can come to that now. So memory promoting approaches, like what we have just talked about, recall practice, it is one way that we can actually allow the learning to take place by pushing the information from the working memory to the long-term memory. We can do that by what we call non-stick testing. It can be done individually or in a pair. Then allow the students to check after the recall practice. We can encourage active, independent working on a problem by themselves. So what does this mean? So basically, in short, we want the students to immediately check on themselves, not too long from the learning that has taken place. So one way we can do it is what we call brain dump. So for example, if you have just covered teaching a particular topic, reactivity or method, for example, okay, after you've gone through maybe a good 15 minutes, okay, you tell the students, okay, I want you to pull out this piece of paper which I've given you in the Padlet. For the next 30 seconds, I want you to put down whatever you can recall me teaching you. Doesn't have to be specific, as much as you can. Then the next 1 minute, what they can do is they can check with their classmate, hey, what information I have and whatever they don't have, now we will share. Then finally, they will pick and add. Picking what? Picking at their notes and then add on to whatever that both himself and the classmates have not been able to retrieve. Another way to do retrieval practice, okay, is we pause the lesson, we get the students to write down everything about X, for example, reactivity or methods, and then we continue the lesson. And that's one way we can get them to retrieve whatever information that they have learned. It is a form of recall practice. Just remember, it is a learning strategy, and always emphasize to your student, it is not an assessment strategy. And we want them to keep trying to recall, because by doing that, you are stimulating the learning, okay? And by doing that, you're actually promoting the movement of the learning from the working memory to the long-term memory. And once that is done, we want to be able to recall them, to the forefront again. So in the Padlet, I've given you this particular template. I hope that you all can consider printing it and then maybe explain to your student and using it as part of your teaching and learning routine. So it's actually captured in the Padlet that I've shared earlier on. Another source that I would like to recommend is this particular book that talks quite a fair bit about retrieval practice. It has a guide step by step how you can consider using retrieval practice to improve learning for your student. But please don't download it and then share with your student and as a text to read. It is for you to consider how you can put retrieval practice as part of a teaching learning routine for your day-to-day teaching. Okay, and why is this space retrieval so important? Because learning in short bursts over time and repeatedly testing ourselves is more effective than long-term recall as compared to cramming. So if you look at this graph, this is where learning happened, 100%. After a day, it will drop to about 70%, maybe 60%. And this is where the students should consider recalling whatever they have learned. And then of course, they can always check back their notes after they have tried to recall. Then, when they are about to forget to about 70%, of course, it's very difficult to judge when it's 70%, about day 3, they can consider another space retrieval again. Then they do so on day 6. You realize that even as the day goes by, the recall is getting better. The forgetting is getting lesser. But if a particular student say, no, I'm going to learn at day 7, but I'm going to just cram everything in 5 hours, I can tell you the students will not be able to recall a single thing. Or at max, maybe just the peripheral learning. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a little video clip here right now, and then we will watch and see the effect of retrieval practice. Let me see if I've shared sound or not. Yes, I've shared.
Have you ever been in the situation where it's the night before the exam and you're opening the textbook for the first time? Whoa! You've got a fresh pot of coffee and a 12-pack of Red Bull just to play it safe. You may pass the exam, but you'll forget all of that information at hypersonic speed. Hope there's not a cumulative final.
Remember how your teachers told you, don't cram, it won't work? Well, guess what? That's actually true. What if we told you that studying 5 hours spread out across 2 weeks is actually better than studying that same 5 hours right before the exam? Not only is this advice backed by science, but you also don't need to stay up studying all night right before the exam if you space it out. Here's what you do. After class, take a break, unwind. Then, later on that day, review what you learned.
Let's say you have class on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You might briefly review what you learned in each class later in the day. Then schedule brief study sessions on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Take Saturday off. We won't judge you. Spacing out your studying may seem difficult, and it may seem like you're forgetting information from day to day, but that's actually good. Going through the process of remembering and relearning the information better ingrains it in your memory. So force yourself to space out your studying. You'll remember more from each study session than you would if you crammed them all together.
So, if you cram, you'll learn less and forget more quickly. Another problem with cramming? It often replaces sleep, and sleep is very important for learning.
So this is one video that, of course, I must, get you all to really, buy in, and then you will find it appropriate. You can share this with your student, because one of the things that our students often experience is they will do what we call last minute, cramming, and that's not going to help. But for them to be comfortable with, doing this space retrieval, I think it's important that in our teaching and learning day-to-day, we provide opportunity for them to do recall practice in the classroom. Doesn't have to be very, very prolonged session of maybe half an hour. It could be just 5 minutes. Or if you don't have the 5 minutes, it could be just 2 minutes. The whole idea is to get them to put away whatever they have in front of you, be it the notes or textbooks, and then try to recall whatever they heard you sharing or teaching for the last maybe 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. And by doing that regularly and by encouraging them to go back to do the space retrieval, learning will then take place, by moving the learning from the working memory into a long-term memory. And then trust me, they are in such a much better position to do application, subsequently. So I encourage you to consider this for your student. So how long should we wait between episodes of space retrieval? A good rule of thumb is to forget till students are just forgetting. This is definitely going to be different from student to student, but generally, the number of days that is outlined here in this diagram works for most of our students. So this is another catchy idea, the 10-24-7 effective study strategy. Yeah, get the students to kind of like review something new within the next 10 minutes, within the 24 hours, and within 7 days. Okay, so you can either choose between this or the earlier one. I find this a lot easier to follow. The whole idea is get your students into the habit, to do recall and retrieval in a spaced manner. Okay, and John Hattie done tremendous amount of research, and he found that spaced practice has an effect size of 0.65. It's even greater than motivation. So imagine you combine motivation and this, the effect size for our students' learning is going to increase tremendously. And like what I say, once they are able to learn well, they achieve what we call a sense of competence, it will naturally fit into the motivation cycle. Okay, so this is a diagram I love to show my students. I say when you cram, you're basically trying to build a wall, okay, without allowing the mortar to dry up. So what's going to happen? You're just going to get a lump of bricks. Okay, but if you want to have a wall that is able to be strong, you have to allow the mortar to dry before you place the next layer of bricks. This is the same as learning. Cramming won't work. So I think it's something that we want to emphasize to our students. So I've spoken about, the importance, of recall practice and how we can allow our students to do so in the classroom. I also emphasize the importance that students should continue to do some of this recall in a spaced manner, throughout the whole weeks. But having said that, we also know that among our students, we have the hikers and car racers. So what do I mean by this? Hikers basically belong to a group of students where the working memory, by and large, in our opinion, is not so high capacity. And also we have a car racer where we have students who have tremendous, high working memory. Okay, so we have to approach our students differently in the way how we help them to kind of like work on their memory. So this is just a diagram to show you, typically for students with low working memory, they probably have 3 tacticals as compared to students with a strong working memory. But the good news is, regardless of their working memory capacity, if we are able to help them to pick up useful strategy through our teaching and learning can take place, because the good news is the long-term memory for all these students are unlimitless. It's unlimitless. Oh, sorry, it's not unlimited. Unlimited is limitless. Yeah. So how can we support students with lesser capacity? These are some of the things that you may want to consider. Be brief linguistically. Make sure your students are looking at you when you are giving instruction. Get them to check with their partner. So instead of giving verbal instruction, you may want to write on a whiteboard or on the screen. And then if you are introducing new vocabulary, which are plentiful in chemistry, you may want to give them the vocabulary list. But the one thing that I want to emphasize in this slide is activating prior knowledge. If you can recall what I shared earlier on, one of the ways to do encoding successfully is to anchor it down to something in the long-term memory. There is an old experience with the new experience. It will allow the students with lesser capacity working memory to learn a lot better. Okay, because now the long-term memory can become part of the working memory. So the more assistance the working memory get from the prior knowledge in the long-term memory, the lesser our students will have to, tap onto their working memory to learn new materials. So later on, I'm going to share with you why concept cartoon, or rather, is such a powerful way to activate prior knowledge. Okay, so before we go on to the concept cartoon, we also don't want to forget how about those students with super capacity or working memory. So it's an opportunity for you to go beyond factual question, which I don't think is something that we're unfamiliar with. Give them the opportunity to coach, their classmate. And then if need be, you have what we call time filler, or in this case, sponge activity, that allow them to stretch themselves. Yeah, you may want to provide them with more synoptic questions, right at the end of the lesson. Okay, so sorry that the brain break come a bit later this time round, but still I will give you a longer brain break this time round. Instead of a minute, I'll probably give you 2 minutes. Okay, how may you want to do brain dump or recall practice in your classroom? Or how will you want to structure space retrieval as a learning routine for your students? And then how might activating prior knowledge help to improve retention or learning? The last bullet is basically a recall question. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes for a time to note to yourself. I'm not too sure how many of you in this room has tried concept cartoon. It's one way that we can use to activate prior knowledge by the statements that we place in the concept cartoon itself. So let me just quickly run through. I won't go through the reason why we use concept cartoon. So in this particular example that I chose is, what do you know about pH acidity and basicity? So basically concept cartoon, as the term shows, is basically, we use cartoon to promote humor, and then we put statement in the speech bubble. So basically, student A, it could be option A. The pH of water at 62 degrees Celsius is a 6.5. This is a JC example, just in case you all may be wondering. Therefore, water has become acidic. A student will say, oh no, a solution with pH equal 1 is a strong acid. A solution with pH greater than 7 is alkaline. And then H2SO4 is a stronger acid than HCl. And H2SO4 contribute 1 more H plus than HCl. Each of a statement, has a potential prior knowledge that's attached to it. Yeah. So this is one way, that we can actually get the students to take on different role as indicated by the different speech bubble, and then to explain to their classmate. Okay. Another example, could be a case of, getting the students to look at this bubble, and ask themselves, what exactly is it? So student A could say, the bubbles are filled with air. Or student B or student Ahmad could say that the bubbles are an invisible form of water. Of course, Tony may say there's nothing inside the bubble, or Shanti could say the bubble contains hydrogen and oxygen separated from water. Each and every one has an inherent possible misconception or some prior knowledge that they may carry themselves. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the concept cartoon. This is another concept cartoon, okay, on this particular example of how do you solve a problem when there's a spillage of acid on the road.
Okay, in one of the group that I was in just now, I was sharing with them the importance of rest, okay, that we kind of like incorporate into our students' maybe routine. It could be in your classroom, but very often teacher is unwilling to do that because they say, oh, my time is so tight, right? I want to finish my syllabus. Okay, they can rest maybe during recess or other time. Okay, whatever. But if it's possible, it's actually one of the great routine to incorporate into your classroom, where we allow what we call short brain break. Why? Because much of our students' learning, if you look at it clearly, okay, I should have shown this first. It's actually the focus mode, okay? So basically, when we are getting our students to really concentrate on something that is new, they're really focusing on their thinking. And it is a very highly attentive kind of activity where our students is really ignoring all the distraction. And of course, we would want them to ignore the distraction, and they really are focusing. And when that happens, the way the neuron connection are connected is kind of like close to each other. These are what we call focus mode. Okay, but that being said, very often it is important that we get our students to be able to move into the diffuse mode, where they look at the problem at the bigger picture. Okay, and this is something that is important, especially much of our problem that our students are experiencing, be it in the kind of exam questions they are experiencing, or even in the world out there, we are looking at problems that are probably unseen. And some of these problems require them to be able to connect the dots across topics for some of the synoptic questions. But more importantly, in life next time, that they realize that some of the problems they're going to face require them to pull knowledge from the different part of their learning. So I would like to encourage all of you, if possible, from time to time, as you're doing your teaching and learning, provide time for them to do brain break. So what do I mean by brain break? I say, are you telling me to let them rest for 30 minutes? No. Okay. Sometimes it could be just a good 20 seconds to 40 seconds. It is really, as you are getting them to do active learning, we want them to break up the lesson for the kind of short break. And that surprisingly can actually boost their attention indirectly. Okay. So I'm not asking for a lot, 20 to 40 seconds. And if you do it regularly enough, the brain kind of get accustomed to it. Okay, I kind of have a, dash for 20 minutes, then I have a short rest for 20 to 40 seconds, between the active learning. You'll be surprised that they can give you better attention in the second half of the lesson. So basically, doesn't mean off task is bad. When they're off task, basically means they are going into the diffuse mode. Yeah, and this allows memory consolidation. So sometimes, even adult, we experience it. We work hard. We think that we just plow in and we just kind of like fix our mind on it, we will learn. But unfortunately, sometimes, we come to a stage where we call, we just feel so overwhelmed. We need to allow our brain to be diffused or in short rest. And this subconscious processing time that happens during rest actually allows for the memory to consolidate in the long-term memory. Okay, so allow our students to have free mind wandering, so-called quote-unquote, period in the classroom. Okay, I'm going to skip this part. So example of how to exploit or diffuse mode. This is something you may want to suggest to your students. Of course, not every student may want to try it. One of my favorite is the third bullet. I remember that happening to me vividly when I was in my JC education. I was trying to solve a further math question that I couldn't solve, for the whole night. And then I decided to just leave it. And then I go to bed. And then very interestingly, in the middle of my sleep, the solution was formed in my dream. I'm not sure whether that is a good or bad thing, but I woke up and I penned down the solution that I couldn't even get through the night before. Some of the students may experience that, not all the time. So the whole idea is, it is important that we get our students to recognize that they cannot always be in their focus mode. We need to exploit the diffuse mode. But of course, some of you may be wondering, but my students is always in the diffuse mode all the time. So there's a different problem that we're talking about. Okay, that we need to put in routine that we help them to focus. But having said that, we should not ignore the diffuse mode. That's equally important for their learning. Next is sleep. I won't belabor that. We all agree sleep is important. And this is just for your side to share with your students. These are just some research finding about Singapore students and their poor sleep. Okay. Yeah. So basically, memory consolidation during waking rest. So I will talk about brain break just now. That is basically waking rest. It is also as important as what we call the actual rest when we go to bed. The last thing I want to talk about, which is really one of the challenges that many of our students experience, is called procrastination. So I just want to quickly touch on this. This has nothing to do with memory per se, but everything will do with the brain. So what is actually procrastination? So basically procrastination, you'll be very surprised. The part that activates the brain when it's painful, it is also activated when you are procrastinating. So when a child is procrastinating, he's feeling what we call pain. But the good news is we can overcome it. How? we can use what we call the Pomodoro method. There's nothing magical about 25 minutes, but researcher has found this 25 minutes seems to be quite magical. So basically, we get our students to be able to stay in a focus mode, okay, for 25 minutes. In the 25 minutes, we tell them maybe put your phone to flight mode, put the handphone away, tell them to be total no interruptions, okay? And then we tell them at the end of 25 minutes, you may give yourself a simple reward by maybe going for a walk or having a favorite beverage. The whole idea is tell them procrastination is something that they can overcome. And therefore, in that overcoming of procrastination, they can get into the focus mode. And that actually releases dopamine, which we'll talk about earlier on. Okay, so I just want to bring in this last thing that you may find your students actually experiencing, okay, in their teaching, in their learning, from day to day. Yeah, so if they are able to fight procrastination, chances is, they can stay in the focus mode for a longer period of time and they're able to learn better. So this is just something add on that I want to just give it to all of you. Okay, so final brain break before I get the participants for 2022 to do her sharing is now just take a minute and ask yourself, when you pen down a note to self, in terms of viewing my students, maybe it's time to view them through the working memory perspective rather than intelligence. Some of you actually mentioned that now you have rekindled the possibility of using concept cartoon. Maybe are your lessons cognitively overloading? Is it possible that you build in space retrieval routine into your lesson for your students to do recall practice? And maybe it's time for you to emphasize the importance of brain break, waking rest, as well as sleep to your student. Although they know it, but I think it's important that you remind them again and again. Okay, so let's take a minute on this. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Wong Kai Ning to share what she has learned from the course last year, which she's not going to go through, in detail, and what she has kind of like pick up and then put in practice for her classroom as well as for her department. She's currently the HOD of Science for Anderson Serangoon Junior College. Okay, so without further ado, let me invite Ms. Wong. You can share screen.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Goh, for the intro. Yes, let me now share my screen. Right. Okay, so you can see my slides. All right, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Kai Ning, and I'm currently teaching in Anderson Serangoon JC. I'm glad to join all of you here today to share with you the key takeaways I have from the workshop last year. So I'm not sure if you are actually facing similar situation like I had. So last year I was a JC2 chemistry tutor, also a subject head. So back then there were some questions I had for myself. Yeah, so I was asking myself, how do I help my students who seem unmotivated in class or outside class when they're doing their own revision? And how do I help those who are weaker in the subject? And by then, it's already year 2, A-level soon. Sometimes they feel like very dejected when they see their MYCT results, media common test results. Yeah, so wondering how to help these group of students. And of course, in my capacity as a subject head, I also wonder how do I help my colleagues? Because every time they come back to staff room, you can see that they look very exhausted because they tried out so many ways to reach out to the unmotivated learners, but they feel that their effort hasn't been working very well. And of course, if from last year, so we will have a new batch this year, if we start all this all over again, what would we do differently? Yeah, so these were some questions I had, and then I saw the publicity for this workshop, and that's why I signed up. And it's a similar date last year when we had a synchronous session. So from this workshop, I met like-minded colleagues, also from JC and secondary schools. And from the sharing during the breakout sessions, we hear that all of us have similar experiences when we interact with students. So this kind of comforted me that, yeah, I'm not facing a unique problem. It's something that we can all work together to see how we can overcome the challenge better. Then, of course, through the breakout sessions, we also shared ideas, what each of us tried, worked, didn't work, what other things we can explore with our students in the classroom. And of course, there are some new ideas introduced from the workshop. Like just now you have seen, we have also seen it last year, the concept cartoon, brain dump, etc. But personally for myself, what excited me the most is the second part, which is learning about how the brain works, because this is totally new to me as of last year. So from there, Mr. Goh, he actually introduced me to other workshops on Coursera. So these are free courses. So learning how to learn as well as uncommon sense teaching. So these workshops, what is good about them is actually through a lot of videos. So I can actually watch them as and when I'm free. And they actually help you to save your progress so that you can actually leave and join back anytime you want. And I actually pick up a lot of very interesting concepts and understand how our brain actually works. And it's very refreshing because you have grown up so many years and you suddenly realize that actually this is how my brain runs and how I should do to help my brain optimize learning. So of course, this year, I also saw this course being publicized, and that's when I also thought to actually hear from more experts and see what are some things that can be used in classroom as well. So after gathering all this learning, so how does it then affect my daily work in class and also with my department? So first one is actually change how I interact with my students. So what I mean is, I think as teachers, we tend to focus on sharing the content, the subject content with our students. But if we realize that what is more important is tapping on the brain functions to learn well. So I thought that why not I also help my students to understand better how their brain works, so that they do things that help their brain work better, rather than, do other things like take brain break and use phone and end up affect their learning even more. Yeah, so this kind of sharing, of course, is not like in a classroom setting. It's more of informal setting. Sometimes when I have a small group consultation with students, then there are some that will approach me like, teacher, I already tried this, tried that. Why is it still not working? Then I'll share with them, well, have you considered actually, this is how your brain works. You have working memory, you have long-term memory. So how do you help yourself remember things better? Perhaps these are something you need to try, because these are as shared by neuroscience experts. So when they hear it, they are actually convinced, and it becomes apparent to them why they keep forgetting what they learn despite putting in effort. Of course, from this workshop, I also learned about the effective aspects of learning. Sometimes when students see the bad results, they actually link to their self-esteem, and the moment self-esteem is affected, it makes them even more less likely to want to learn new things, because they feel that probably they are unlikely to succeed. So when I communicate to students now, I actually tell them how they should view their performance, that is not determining their ability, but rather it tells them at that point in time how much they understand. So helping them to see things a little differently. I wouldn't say it turned them to become super motivated students, but in a sense, it made them more positive towards learning. So the idea here is to remind them that everything in class, whether is it a small checkpoint, is it assessment, is about helping them to learn. So from each exercise, they must know what to gather, the learning points. Then also in class, I think we all have a lot of content to deliver. So sometimes we only have a certain amount of time, and then I say, I must finish that amount of content. So we tend to rush it through. But after we learned about the working memory capacity limit, you realize that there's actually no much point in rushing through 5 minutes if actually nothing goes in the end. So I've chosen to focus on quality and less on quantity of learning in class. Yeah, so that's first one on how I change interactions with students. Then second one is we actually reinforce some plans we initiated for the cohort. So last year we started this Camp Pacer program. The idea here is to provide structure for students to build the habit of regular revision, which in the end, after we learned about how to help the brain actually store things into a long-term memory. So this one actually ties to the idea of retrieval practice. So in a way, what the neuroscience tells us is, this is the right way to go. So therefore, we are continuing with this program, which actually has good feedback from students. And this year, we are continuing for both batches in JC1 and JC2. Yeah, so this one is a quick overview of the survey results. We asked the students last year, would they recommend this PACER revision program for their juniors? So majority of those who responded said yes. So I feel that in a way, it is reinforcing the plan we set out. And of course, what the neuroscience concept shared with us is also in line with it. Then, of course, from my position, I would like to share with the department as well what we learned. And of course, what bothers a lot of us usually is how do we work with weaker students. But I think after we learn from neurosciences, the students themselves, they are not weak in the subject per se, but more of they have some challenges in working with their working memory. Yeah. So through this sharing, we actually shared with the department colleagues that these students, they simply need more help. And how do we then employ strategies that can get students to draw links to the long-term memory and therefore help them to retain the learning better. Yeah, then finally at the personal front, I think following all this learning, it made me more aware of my own thought process. Like just now what you've heard, the focus versus the diffuse mode. So I can understand like why sometimes my ideas, when I try to focus a lot on it, I can't think of new ideas, but going into diffuse mode in a more relaxed condition, somehow the ideas actually come. Yeah, then of course I'm more mindful of my communications. Sometimes there's no point in typing a long message if after that it overwhelms the other party. So try to keep messages short if I can. Then of course I have my own children, very young, and sometimes, you know, they tend not to want to do a lot of practices because they say it actually tires them out. So I have to explain to them, well, this is how your brain works and why practicing regularly is to help you actually master a skill better. So this is definitely a work in progress. It's something that we have to remind our kids every day. Yeah, so these are the key takeaways from me. So thank you very much for hearing about the sharing I had. So I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Kai-Ning. Thanks for the short but very meaningful sharing. So colleagues, do you have any questions that you would like to check with Kai-Ning with regard to what she has done, either as a tutor, as a teacher in the classroom, or as a department head? You can ask her whatever challenges that she has faced, she will share with you. Yeah.
I mean, I can just quickly share on the challenges. So really the challenges is in the classroom, you know, you have limited time. So how do you decide what are the more important things? Yes. So is the important thing to cram all the content in? Or is the important thing to have things like brain breaks or checkpoints, etc., to consolidate learning? So it's really about choice of strategies at appropriate time. Yeah.
And I really like the fact that you take the effort, of course, not at the class or maybe at the department level, to share with your students how the brain works. But research has shown that students who understand how the brain works actually will respond to your intervention strategy of recall practice and space retrieval a lot better, because there they recognize that, hey, you know, I do not want to sabotage my own effort. Yeah, the amount of effort I want to put in, I want to make sure I get the return. Yeah, and one of the things that we also should not play down to our students is learning is going to be taking hard work. Yeah, and as much as possible, we want to talk about diffuse mode as a wonderful mode through rest and through sleep, but they have to put in the fair share of hard work and focus mode. So it's not one or the other, it's both. Yeah. And so we have to be mindful that sometimes, our students could just hear part of the message without realizing that it takes, both mode to work. Yeah. Okay. If there's no question, yeah, if you can use your reaction, just join me to thank Kai Ning for her sharing. Yeah. Thanks so much. If I can stay on before we, I'm going to end very soon with just 2 slides. So really, I hope this will really consolidate whatever that I'm trying to do over the last 2 sessions, whether it is through the synchronous or the asynchronous. Really, I've covered quite a fair bit of motivation in the first session using the motivation theory. I dive quite deeply into autonomy in the first sessions. I didn't really talk much about growth mindset, but I believe most of you are quite familiar with. In this session, if you were to realize that, how does it fall into this motivation theory? I've been working quite a fair bit on the idea of competence. Yeah, when we get our students to be able to process their learning from working memory to long-term memory, and of course, not forgetting the emotion and the attention part, they will experience success. They will achieve competence. And when that happens, it actually fits into the whole motivation cycle. Because when they taste success, they want to try again. We all learned just now that repeated failure will lead to frustration, which causes the amygdala to swell up. So they are all interlinked. So we can't just tweak one and forget the others. The brain is such a complex thing, but the good thing is, we are able, through our teaching and learning action, to fix some of these issues. And of course, at the end of the day, the ball is in the students' court after we have done our part for them to carry on the good effort that we have done in the classroom, especially in the area of our recall practice. Yeah. So I hope that this final slide will kind of consolidate and pull everything together. So your teaching action in the classroom that promote active learning, okay, actually takes care of all these things. Of course, bearing in mind the positive classroom culture that you promote, from time to time through your regular check-in on their emotions and the regular check-in, outside classrooms. All these matters and all play a very important role.